Holocaust Oral History Project. Assisting me are Gary Harper and Lenny Blanche. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
We'd like to begin with information about your family. Where and when were you born?
I was born in Vienna, Austria, and my family consists of father, mother, and a brother who's about 4 years older than I. And okay.
Their names?
The names are Cecile, Ignaz, and my brother's name is Leo.
Could you spell those for us, please?
Cecil, and Ignaz is Ignatz, and Leo is Leo.
Tell us something, please, about your parents, where they were from, what kind of work they did, where they lived.
We lived in Vienna, Austria. My mother was a homemaker. My dad was a conductor for the Austrian railroad. And my brother went to school. He was a chemist. He graduated as a chemist.
What was their religious
We observed some Jewish holidays. Most of them, we didn't keep kosher. We observed the Pesach, for example, had 2 different dishes. I was a choir boy in one of the temples, so was my brother. And that was about the extent of the Jewish relation we had.
What part of the city did you live in?
I was in the second district in Vienna, and mostly Jewish, but not in our street. As a matter of fact, across from our apartment was the unemployment department, so there was a lot of non-Jewish people around.
What was the street like in which you lived?
Cobble Street, tram went by a block away. We played on the sidewalk. I went to school about 3 blocks away. There was a Jewish bakery, a Jewish delicatessen. That's the only thing that was in the neighborhood. There was a district between 2 railroad stations. One was what they called the Nordbahnhof, and the other one was the, I forgot the name now.
Where did you, what kind of school did you go to?
I went to what they call Volksschule, or grade school.
Could you spell that, please?
Volksschule, Volkschule, my German, huh? And the other one was a Gymnasium. Well, first Hauptschule, then Gymnasium. So I graduated after 12 years.
What was the gymnasium you attended?
They taught Latin, which I failed, and mostly art.
What was the name of the gymnasium?
Unterberggasse. Unterberggasse.
In the Volksschule and Hauptschule, how many Jewish students, how many Gentile students were there?
More gentle than Jewish. Very few, actually.
And the teachers?
Teachers, all Gentiles, non-Jews.
At what point did you learn about the rise of the Nazis to power in Germany?
Between 1933 and 1938, you could hear the speeches on the radio of Hitler in the newspapers, and that's when you become aware of. And the rise of the Nazi Party in Austria itself, and the putsch in 36. They killed Dollfuss, who was at that time the president of
Could you spell his name, please?
Dollfuss.
Let me go back just a minute in the chronology. How did your family respond when they heard about Nazism?
Well, one thing is we had my dad through friends, met somebody who escaped from Germany, from Berlin. He was Jewish, and he was invited to our house for meals because he didn't have a job or anything. And he came maybe twice or three times a week, came to our house for a meal. And that's how we were introduced actually what was going on in Germany.
Was your family political in any way? Did they
No.
have political values?
No, none. Except they voted, I guess. I don't know.
And did they have political interests?
No, none. Except what was going on in Germany. They were aware of it.
As the Nazi Party in Austria grew larger, did you see evidences of it around you in your neighborhood?
No, none. Not until Hitler came in.
At the time of the putsch that resulted in the death of Dollfuss, was there any increase then in Nazi activity?
No, not in our district. You never saw him, and you never heard anything about it. At least I wasn't aware of it. It could have been, but I don't know. I was still free to go any place, and you know.
Did you, as a young child and young man, sense anti-Semitism in the streets?
No, never openly. I'm sure it was there, but never openly. Even I think we were the only Jewish people in the apartment house. And my brother had a friend who lived in that apartment house. He was also a university student. And he was a what do you call an illegal Nazi. He belonged to the Nazi Party. And my brother did not know it. He came to our apartment, and his dad worked also for the railroad. That's how we knew it. But they were very good friends, and he never knew that he was a party member until we found out after the war.
Please tell us about the Nazi takeover in 1938.
One day, they just you heard on the radio that Schuschnigg, who was then president of Austria, SCH, NIG, I think, who was president at that time. He made a speech, and then he abdicated, and you could. The announcement was that the Germans were marching in across the border towards Vienna.
What differences did the takeover make in your neighborhood and in your school?
The first thing was all the Jewish kids were separated. We had to go to a different school, different teachers, and this was in March, so in 1938. That was the first thing. The second was that my dad was pensioned off because he was Jewish. And was about just about it at that moment. Yeah.
Did you sense any difference in the life of the streets in your neighborhood and in your apartment?
No, we didn't. Not at all. The only thing was when November the 9th, what they call now Kristallnacht, came around. Then it started out, and then you could see what's going to happen.
What did you experience at this time?
I was enrolled in a class to manufacture a leather because my parents thought that I should have some kind of a training in some kind of not profession, but anything so I can do with my hands. And I was enrolled in one of those classes that taught leather fabrication, or purses and wallets, and it was out of the district, and I usually walked from my home to that class. And that November the 9th, when they had the pogrom, some Gestapo came into our class, and they took us to a police station till evening, and after dark, then they released us, and I ran home. I literally ran home along the apartment houses, and there was a big park there, because you could see cars going, Nazis in brown uniform, the SR. And when I got home, of course it was by midnight when I got home, and my parents were worried. My dad, he was hiding. They came to the apartment, they came in the apartment house, they were looking for him, but he was hiding downstairs in the cellar, in a coal bin. And when everything was over, then he came up, and I just got home at that time. It was at midnight.
What did your parents tell you about what they had experienced during the day?
They told us what I just told you, that the SR came, and they were looking for him, and he was hiding in the cell. My brother was gone by then. He was a month before he left for the United States. So.
What happened in the days following?
It was very tense. You couldn't go. You could go outside, and we did, but all you saw is people in Nazi uniform. If they didn't have a uniform, they at least had what do you call it, a flag or some kind of a button that the Hakenkreuz on it, a Nazi emblem. It was very tense.
Did your family at this time discuss immigration?
No, they didn't. They didn't think anything could happen. But there was talk about a children's transport going to England. And this was put together by the Jewish community. And they inquired about it because they wanted to send me out. But they never talked about that they're going to go anywhere too. First of all, they didn't know where to go. They didn't have any money. So they were talking about kinder transport to England. And I think the second transport, they got my name in. But just 2 days before, the transport was to be leaving Vienna to go to England, had to take my name off because they had too many. And they had a transport that went to Holland, and they put me on that. And 2 days later, December the 10th of 1938, I went on a kinder transport to Holland.
Before we go further, let me ask you about your brother's decision.
I have an uncle in New York, and he has been there for 30 years. He was the brother of my dad, and he sent an affidavit to my brother to get him out. And he got the affidavit, and to some maneuvering with the consulate, he got out just in time before November the 9th.
In December, then you went to college.
Right.
Tell us about what happened there.
My parents took, and I had an aunt and uncle still in Vienna who lived about 2 blocks from us. Was a brother of my mother. They took me to the train, and I forgot the railroad station. I know it had to go west, so they took me to the train, and the train took us to Holland. It was an evening, and there were some friends on the train. I knew as a choir boy, I knew a couple of them, and they were on the train, so at least there was somebody there I knew. And the next day we got to Holland, to Den Haag.
With whom did you stay at home?
In a group home. They formed a group home, and we stayed in Den Haag for quite a while, and then we moved to Rotterdam. And we stayed in Rotterdam from 38 till the war started, 1940.
In Rotterdam, with whom did you stay?
Also in that group home until, all the time, that when the war started in May 1940, Rotterdam got bombed, and we were just about, a block away where the bombs fell, and it hit our house. So we were sleeping outside for a while, and then the whole group, there were about 60 of us, moved from Rotterdam to Arnhem in a former castle that belonged to one of the royalties, and we stayed there until we got deported.
During this time that you were in college, what contact did you have with your
I got cards from my mother, maybe 3 or 4, maybe more, I don't know. And on one of the cards, she was telling us that my dad was put in a labor camp, and she was supposed to meet him somewhere, and then they were going to a labor camp in Poland. And I think she mentioned Minsk, but I'm not sure about that.
How long did that contact with her continue?
Until 1941 was the last, I think, I got.
During the time that you were in the group homes in Holland, what kinds of things did you do?
I went to school. I went to a art school in Arnhem, and also I was employed in Rotterdam. I was employed in a factory where they designed Oriental rugs, and I became an apprentice. And then in Arnhem, I went to school there, and I also worked in a small place where they designed and manufactured cutouts to hang on the walls for a children's room, like Walt Disney characters, something like that.
Please tell us about the circumstances around your deportation.
One day in 1942, I was also I couldn't work anymore at the place, and the school closed down. So I got a job as a housemaid at a Jewish family. I had 2 kids, 2 small children. I was babysitting most of the time. And so one day, just got home, and it was in the evening from the job. There was some Gestapo men in that group home, and they packed us up. They took us to a school, and that same night they took us on a train to Camp Westerbork.
What was the train trip like to Westerbork?
It was a regular train, a passenger train, and it was our kids were in there, and some other people, Jewish people, they rounded up in Arnhem itself, and they all sent them to Westerbork.
What did the Nazis tell you about the purpose of the trip?
Nothing.
What did you in the group think?
We thought we were going to a camp. That the rumor started that we're going to a camp. We had no idea what the camp was, Westerbork. And that was about it.
Do you know of other people who had been deported earlier?
No, I don't. The only thing we knew that some of the people were rounded up in Amsterdam and other cities, and some were sent to Mauthausen, that we knew, a concentration camp Mauthausen in Austria. And that's about the extent of it.
During the time before you were deported to Westerbork, when you were living in the group home, did you have contact with Dutch families, or were you living mainly with Jewish families?
The only contact I had with people I worked for, which was a Jewish family, Dutch Jewish family, and that was the only contact I had. The place where I worked was they both were Christians, and since I didn't work anymore, so I had no contact with them. And we were wearing, at that time, we were restricted because we had to wear the yellow star, and we couldn't go anywhere.
Did people out of your group go into hiding?
Yes. Some had some friends on the outside, and when the Gestapo came in, they were gone. So apparently, since I wasn't home, some rumor must have started, and they disappeared. So they were in hiding, yes.
What penalties did the Nazis impose for those people who were left after the others escaped?
I don't know. I don't know what happened.
Do you know what happened to those people who went into hiding?
Yeah, I know some of them came back after the war, so they were okay. They were hiding all the time. Some were hiding in farms. The Jewish family I was working for, the woman, the 2 children, she took them to some farmers in southern Holland somewhere. And so the children were safe, but they were picked up later too, both of them.
Were they then deported, or were they
Yeah, they were deported. He died, I don't know where. she spent her time in Ravensbrück, in concentration camp.
Did she then return?
She returned after the war. Yeah.
When you came to Westerbork, what happened there?
We were put in a barrack, and Westerbork was started actually as a camp for refugees who came to Holland illegally from Germany. The Dutch did not know what to do with them. So they put them in a camp in Westerbork, which was in the northwestern part of Holland, desolated area. And they put them in there. So when I got to, it was all German Jews. So when I got there, they were in charge of Westerbork. And so anybody who spoke German or was from Austria, from Germany, had an edge. So you get the better jobs if there were jobs available.
What was life like on a daily basis at Westerbork?
Fairly routine. Food wasn't too bad. You had your own clothing. You lived in the barrack. You lived mostly with your own friends, young people my age, 16, 17 at that time. I worked. I did some outside work. I was also worked in an office. I was doing some what they call a run from one office to another, with piece of papers and things like that. And that's.
Who were the people in charge of daily life?
The German refugees in camp. They ran that camp itself.
What contact did you have with Germans?
With Nazis, none at all. The only contact I saw him when they started deporting to Auschwitz. That's the only.
How long were you at Westerbork?
Almost a year.
During that time, what did you learn about what was going on with deportations in the rest of Europe?
Very little. Each Tuesday morning, there was a train going somewhere with approximately 600 people. And by that time, Westerbork became a transit camp. In other words, they were rounding up Dutch, Jewish, and other people too, in Amsterdam, mostly because most the Jewish people were living in Amsterdam. They were rounding them up and bringing them to Westerbork, and then they transported them each Tuesday, about 600 to somewhere. Sometimes the same train, which were cattle trains, made out of cattle cars, came back, and they had might have a writing on the wall or a piece of paper, and it would say either Theresienstadt or Auschwitz. And that's the first. And since I was delegated at that time to clean out, they came in on a Monday afternoon. Those trains had to be cleaned to get ready for the next day. I had sometimes the job that I had to clean out the cattle train, and we found those notes.
What did you know about those names?
Nothing. No idea. We surmised that this was a camp or camps. And we also knew that because of the people they called up to go on this transport, sometimes were older people. We knew that they were going to Theresienstadt. And that's the only time we started to know anything about what was going on.
Did you see the loading of trains?
Oh yeah.
How did that, what happened?
There was a list came out on Monday evening, and went into the barracks, and the people were called up. They had to pack their things, their suitcases, and had to be ready by Tuesday morning, and they had to march to the people who were in charge of the barracks, marched them to the train. They were loading them up on the train. They got some food from the kitchen.
What were the responses of people who had to leave?
Some were crying because some relatives or friends were left behind. Otherwise, it was very quiet.
Were all the people whom you knew who were reported Jewish? Were there other groups?
So far I knew they were Jewish. I don't know. There might have been other people. I don't know.
Did anyone escape from Westerbork?
Yes. Yeah. It was surrounded with wire, and it wasn't electric wire, no. And some people escaped. They cut through the wire with shears or whatever they had handy, and some did escape.
How did the Nazis respond to that?
They were looking with dogs for him, but they never could find him.
What resistance organization or escape organization was there in the camp?
None at all. Nothing. They had quite a police force made out of mostly, all Jewish, Dutch and German young people who had a uniform, and they kept order in that camp. We never saw any Nazis in camp itself in uniform, except for those trains. When the trains left, then they had to watch Nazis.
How did the loading of a train work? What happened when that train was getting ready to go?
There was a platform. They had assembled on the platform, and a Nazi came along, a assessment came along and said, so many people in here, so many people in here. That was it. They packed up their belongings and went in a cattle train.
About how many people in the car?
I would say about 50 at that time.
Were there facilities for sanitation?
No, there was a bucket in there, a bucket for sanitation. That's about it.
On the days when you cleaned the car as it came back, what did you clean the car?
Scrubbing out the floor, and that was it.
Did you find other things in the
No,
car besides the loading?
no, I never did, except notes, sometimes names, and mostly we are in Auschwitz, Theresienstadt, just one name. That was it. But apparently it went to someplace else, I don't know.
At what point did you learn what Auschwitz was?
When I got there.
Please tell us.
Okay. One day my name was called up, and I had some friends in the office, and I tried to get my name taken off, but they couldn't do it. They had to fill a quota. So I was put same way like the rest. Had a little bag with my clothes. I got some food, and I was put on the train. And in 1943, in the middle of 1943. and I was put on the train to destination unknown. When we got to Auschwitz, they opened the door, and there was a mass of people in Nazi uniform and people in striped uniform. And they hurried us out, and we had to stand in a single line. And sometimes a Nazi, an SS man would come by, and he saw some boots of one of those people, and he would tell him to take them off. And he had to give it to them.
How long did the trip take?
I think about 2 days, 2.5 days.
And about what time of day did you leave?
It was in the middle of the day. And we had to stand in a single file, a single line, and filed into a building. Before that, we had to leave all our belongings on the outside. In other words, my bag, I had a bag of clothing, I had to leave there. And then we started filing into a single file into the building. When we got into the building, there was a table there. There were 3 SS uniform guys sitting. And the guy in the middle was pointing his finger either to the left or to the right. And when he was pointing the finger to the left, that meant that you were going into a labor camp, and he was pointing to the right, and meant you were going into the gas chamber. And it only took a second, less than a second. He just looked at you, and he pointed the finger to the left, and I went to the left, and I could see on the right there was a door opening. I could see those black hats, shower heads, black shower, huge black shower heads. And in the back of the assessment, there were some mentally handicapped people sitting against the wall. And apparently they were on the same transport that we came from Holland. And the SS they were just shoving him. Every time they opened up that huge door, they were just shoving him in. I went to the left and went to a room, and we stripped completely. They took away any jewelry, anything you had, any clothes you had. They shaved your head. They shaved your whole body, as a matter of fact. We went into another room, and we took a shower. We had no towel and no soap. And then after that, we were driven out to another barrack. And when we got to the barrack, we had to stand in line, and it seemed hours. We stood there, and then we got before a prisoner. I didn't know they were prisoners, in a striped uniform, and he put a number, a tattoo number, on your left arm.
Could you read the number, please?
175345. And then they gave us some striped clothing consisting of a shirt, pants, a jacket, and 2 pieces of cloth. They were about that size, like a huge handkerchief. And the purpose was you had to wrap it around your feet instead of socks. and they gave us some shoes. There were some shoes lined up, and you had to choose one of the shoes, and a belt to hold up your pants. And they drove us to another barrack, and we stayed there overnight. And I don't remember how we slept, on what we slept, no idea. This was Birkenau. This was not Auschwitz, this was Birkenau. And the next morning, they came and we marched into Auschwitz, into a concrete building which was called Block 11. Block 11, I found it out afterwards. I didn't know that. Block 11 was an experiment block for men. What they were doing, what the Nazis were doing, what we found out later, it was a concrete building. It was a cell, a huge cell, had a window, an open window, about that large, no glass in it. And there was a trough in the back of the wall. And what they were doing, they were practicing with guns on the prisoners with silencers. They wanted to see what happens. And they were washing off after every time they did it, they were washing the walls off, but you still could see some blood, dried blood in those troughs. And I stayed there about for almost a week.
During this first day, what were your reactions? What did you think?
You didn't think at all. You were scared. You had no idea what's going to happen. And one day, it was, I believe, the last day, just the fourth day, must have been the fourth day, I heard a voice across. I was standing by the window. I heard a voice, and it was a woman's voice. And on the other side, next to us, was Block 10. Block 10 was an experiment block for women. And the voice called across, and she recognized me. It was a friend of mine, was in one of those group homes earlier. And she recognized me, and she had only a few moments to tell me that she is in an experiment block. And she said there were Nazis apparently all over. And she said, I'll talk to you tomorrow, but tomorrow never came because they took us out of the block and they put us in a truck and they took us to Monowitz, which was a satellite camp of Auschwitz.
Please spell it.
Monowitz.
What was the name of the woman who called out to you?
I don't. It was a Hungarian name. I'm sorry. Can't remember.
How long were you in Block 11?
About 5 days. Yeah.
What happened finally?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. We stood there, we're in that block every day, at mealtime, at noon. Some couple came in and selected a few to bring some food. They brought in a kettle from the kitchen for soup, and that was about it, and a piece of bread.
What contact did you have with other prisoners who were watching out for you or taking care of?
Just the prisoners who were in that cell. That's about it.
What did you learn from them about
I had a friend. I got a cold. I got a little bit sick, and so I didn't go out. And he was selected to go to get the food, and he went out and came back, and he was telling that They're all concrete buildings out there. A lot of SS men, dogs. He saw some SS men taking movies. That's the only thing we heard about it.
What was the couple like?
Uniform. He was nondescript. He wore a uniform, a striped uniform. Had like all prisoners, had a white piece of cloth sewed on the jacket, which was the number plus what they wear. Like, for example, Jewish people had a Star of David, a yellow Star of David, a prisoner who wasn't in prison because of a thievery or a murder had a green triangle, and he was one of those green triangles.
What other types of prisoners did you see in those few days?
Not in Auschwitz, but later on. Mostly the capos were all green triangles. There was a distinction. If a triangle was pointing upward, he was a light criminal. In other words, he was a thief or embezzler. If the triangle was pointing downwards, he was at least a murderer. So he was what they call a heavy criminal. And those people were mostly the Lagerälteste, which was the camp elder, I should say. He was a Schreiber, which was the head of the office, or he was a Läufer, which was the butler to a commander. And they were mostly green triangles. Pink triangles were homosexuals. Black triangles were asocial, antisocial, gypsies. Violet triangle were clergy.
Which one of those groups did you have contact with?
I had contact with green triangles. I'll tell you why later, because and a priest, and a red triangle, which was a communist. They were both Polish, and they became friends. And in one of those camps, in a later camp, not in Monowitz.
What did you experience at Monowitz?
In Monowitz, I was detailed to outside picking up paper, other material that was on those streets. Each morning I had to stand outside and watch the people go to the factory, to the Buna factory, where they were experimenting in synthetic rubber. And each morning march music was playing. In the evening, the people came back, dragging either the dead or the sick behind them. The food, once a day, soup, a piece of bread, and that was about it.
What would be a typical day in Monowitz?
After the people marched out, we were detailed to pick up papers and clean barracks and do all that. And you got contact with other prisoners in that camp, and they started to educate you very, very fast.
What kinds of things did you learn?
What they were doing in Buna, in the factory, what punishment is if you don't do anything, how to behave, who is who runs the camp, which was run mostly by Carpos. That's how educated you are.
What kind of prisoner organization was there?
None that I know of.
Was there any interest in escaping?
No. The escaping was was punished by death, hanging, and that always was a ritual. I witnessed 2 hangings in Monowitz. What they were doing, when somebody escaped and they were caught, they brought them back. You had to assemble in the middle of the camp. The gala was up. The music was playing, march music. The commander with all his entourage came dressed up in the finest uniforms. And you had to, there was a ceremony, I was reading the sentence, and you had to march and witness the hanging around the gallows. And that was about it.
When someone tried to escape, what was the penalty for the prisoners in this block?
I don't know. I never saw that in Monowitz. I did see it in the camp. I was in the next camp. I went from there, but I never saw it in Monowitz.
How long were you in Monowitz?
About 3 weeks.
What did you think during this time? How were your attitudes developing and changing?
Try to adapt and become like follow, more or less, and don't make any noise or anything, just keep going. And you became so numb. Incredible. You followed instructions. You don't think. You didn't think at all. It was incredible.
What relationships did you develop with other prisoners?
I developed some very good relationship with 2 friends, two people, two older people. They were both from Vienna originally. One was living in, both were living in, one was living in France, was picked up, came to Auschwitz. The other one was living in Belgium, in Antwerp. He was a diamond merchant, and he was about 20 years older than I, and he was my bed partner. He was next to me in the barrack, and we became friends. We started talking. We became very good friends, and that was we started to form a group, and that was a support actually.
How large was this support group?
First, just the 3 of us, and then another one joined. One of my friends who was in a group home in Holland. He was an artist, and he joined us. And then later, the priest and the communist leader joined us.
What kinds of support did you give to each other?
We shared. Sometimes we got extra ration. We shared that. We kept close together. We all slept in the same area in the barrack. We talked whenever we had free time, which was very little, maybe on a Sunday afternoon. We talked about everything except religion.
this time in New Orleans?
After one day, we had to stand outside, and a assessment came along with 3 couples. One was they still had striped. The couples still had striped pants, but the jacket was different. One of them was a black jacket, and the other one was a gold jacket, and I've forgotten what the Läufer's jacket was, the butler. And there's S-men, 3 is S-men. One was what they call an Unterscharführer, which was a first lieutenant, I guess. And they selected, out of the group, they selected people. And after the selection, we put us in a truck, and they took us to a camp called Laurerhütte, Laurerhütte, umlaut, TTE. And
What was the basis for that selection?
a labor, which was a factory. And in that factory, they manufactured anti-aircraft guns for the German army. The selection was about 200 people. They took us to that camp. It was completely new. It was a factory. The barrack was not wood. It was a brick building. Had a large outdoor place on the between the factory and the barrack. Had a fence, a brick fence with electrified wire on top on one side, on the other side just electric wire separating the SS from the camp. We were 200 people when we got there. We had to stand outside. The 3 couples came along, the Lagerälteste, the Schreiber, and the Läufer, and they asked for volunteers. What they wanted to do is, what the commander wanted them to do is, somebody who can make a sign that says "Beware electric fence" in German. 2 guys volunteered, and after a while they came back, and the couple, the Schreiber, was yelling at him because they were lying to him. They couldn't, what he was asking them, they couldn't do it. So when I saw them coming back, I volunteered. Now, first of all, you got educated, you never volunteer for anything. Because what I saw in Monowitz, people who volunteered didn't come back. But for some reason, I volunteered. I took a chance. So the couple took me to the commander's office. There was an outer office. He handed me a big sign, wooden sign, was painted white, a brush and some paint and a pencil. And he told me what to write down: "Beware electric fence." And I drew that, and the couple liked it. He went into the commander's office, and the commander liked it. He said, "Okay." And from that moment on, I had a job. I did some other signs. I worked in the prison office. Like I made signs. I did some filings, and I became a notch higher than the rest of the prisoners.
do you remember about the camp commander?
He was a brute. Most of the time, he was either drunk and in a rage, and sometimes he was both. And when he was in a rage and drunk, he came into the camp. We had to stand outside for no reason at all, in the middle of the night, during the daytime. Sometimes he would call in the people from the factory. Had to stand outside for no reason at all. And if there was punishment, there was punishment.
Was he SS?
Yes.
What was his name?
Quackernack. QuackerNck. I think his first name was Walter. I made some greeting cards for him. He had a family in somewhere in Germany. When Christmas or Easter came along, or some other occasion, birthday, he asked me to do, never personally, never addressed me, never. Always to a capo or another SS-man in the outer office. Even then, it was mostly a capo who would relay the message. And I made some cards for him. Apparently he liked them. So he left me alone. But he was a brute. He had a dog who had the habit of, every time we went out of the gate in inspection, every time coming back, the people coming back from the factory, they were inspected if they had any clandestine knives or spoons, and because they were working with metal, so they could manufacture it. They were taken away. They were slapped in the face. The dog had a habit of nipping on your heels every time you walked by. I got bitten a few times.
What was your work routine like?
Getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, assembling outside. We grew to about 600 people in that time period. I stayed there about over 9 months in Lauerhütte. We were 600 people. Most of them, after standing outside, getting a cup full or a trough full, because our food consisted of a little bowl. It was a metal bowl that was enameled. It was about that size. And in the morning we had what they call coffee. It was made of red beets. And we got that in the morning. And then we stood outside and waited. And then about 2 hours later, most of them marched off to the factory. I stayed behind because I was working in the office. And some other people stayed behind. They were cleaning up the barracks and doing outside work, things like this. At noon, everybody came back. They were giving us a ladle of soup, which consisted of hot water, some rotten potatoes, some turnips, sliced turnips, and maybe some meat. But don't ask me to identify the meat. And a piece of bread which was about that size, which was a quart of, or maybe a French bread. It was a dark bread. And maybe we got a piece of marmalade, which also was made out of red beets. Now, you had a choice on that. You either could eat that bread all at once and the soup and wait till next morning or next noon, or you could eat the soup, take your bread and put it in your pocket. But you had to be very careful, put it in your pocket because somebody would steal it. So what we did is, instead of putting it in your pocket, you buttoned up your jacket and you put it inside here, so nobody would steal it. And mostly during the night, you would pick on it, just to keep the hunger at a low point. You would pick on the bread and eat it. Then they marched back into the factory. I stayed in camp. In the evening, again, there was inspection when they came back. Each prisoner was inspected for clandestine, anything they could bring in. Some of them we tried to bring in, because we didn't have any spoons. We didn't have any knives or anything. Every time we ate the soup, it was just like this. Mostly slurping. And in the evening we got another portion of lukewarm coffee. And there was always a ritual in the dealing out the food. At noon, the cook, who was an SS man, came with some help from capos or some prisoners, and brought in a huge kettle. Then you had to line up in a single file on each side of the kettle, and the SS men would delve into the kettle with the ladle and on each side and deal out the soup. Now, you never wanted to be the first, because the water, the hot water, was on top of it. All the good stuff, the rotten potatoes, was on the bottom. So he always tried to maneuver to be at least in the middle or in the back to get the good stuff. There was always a fight. The coppers would come along, they would separate you, they would hit you, they would slap you, then they would shove you in the front so you would get only the water. If there was anything left, because somebody was transferred out, somebody died, there was some soup left, you get a second portion. And then the copper would come along and he would delegate the people, you and you can have a second portion. And that's the portion we, the friends, always shared.
So these the friends from the first group, from Monowitz?
Yeah.
All of you moved together?
We moved together from Monowitz, and in Lauerhütte, that's when we met the priest and the communist leader.
How did that group develop during the time you were at Lauerhütte?
There was another one. He was a Czech, and he became a friend too. He was a merchant, and I don't know. We just usually on a Sunday afternoon, where we had free time. Inside, mostly inside. Outside, you were never allowed to move more than in twos, because they were afraid. Nazis were afraid that something might happen.
What kinds of work did the other men do?
They were mostly working in the factory. They're working on the metal drills or other kind metal manufacturing for those guns.
During this time, what happened to your head?
I got some cold. I got over it. I stayed fairly stable. I never had an aspirin. I never had a headache. and all the time.
Was there an infirmary within the cell?
There was an infirmary, but once you went in, you never came out. So you tried, even if you cut yourself, you tried not to get into the, sometimes you did get in to get a bandage or something like that. But anything more serious, try to stay away as long as possible. Because once you get in there, I never saw anybody come out.
Was there any prisoner organization?
No, no,
Any public resistance?
no, no. There was one escape, two escapes. One successful, the other one wasn't. One was a 16-year-old Russian boy who tried to escape from the factory when they were loading one of those anti-aircraft guns. He was hiding under the tarp, and they found him. They brought him back. They punishment was hanging. They brought him back. First, they took him to Auschwitz for some reason, or to Monowitz, because Laurerhütte was a satellite of Monowitz. They took him to Monowitz. They brought him back into our office, and several hours later, everybody was called in from the factory. They had a gallows coming in from somewhere. We had to assemble again. There was music playing either on a record player or on a radio, I don't know. March music. Again, the commander in his finest uniform, white gloves, with the capo, the Schreiber, and the other capos and some SS watchmen came. We had to line up. We had to watch. There was the capos back of us. Anybody who didn't watch got slapped. We had to watch the hanging. First, he had the capo read the sentence. The SS, the commander, was standing there with white in a uniform, white gloves, black boots, spick and span. Everything was shining. He had a short riding, what do you call it? A whip, yeah. And somebody else, the capo, read the sentence, and he gave the signal to be hanged. We had to watch. One punishment. The other one was two Polish people. Apparently they knew the neighborhood. It was near a town where we were. It was at the edge of Laurerhütte, of the town. Because on the other side, on one side, there was an apartment house, and people could see us from that apartment house on the top floor. And those two people, apparently they must have taken them weeks. They were digging out the bricks where they were sleeping, which led to the outside. And each night they were putting it back. The bricks, they were digging out the mortar, they put them back. And one day, when we had to stand outside at 4 o'clock in the morning, they were counting us. Two were missing. So right away they knew who escaped. They went outside with the dog and couldn't find him. They must have had either help or they knew the area. But our punishment was everybody was called in from the factory who was in there. We had to stand outside. We had to sit in a crouched position like this, with the hands stretched out, and we were given a stick. It was about that size, and we had to sit on that stick with one of the cheeks. And if you fell over or you didn't have your hand stretched out, a copper would come along and he would slap you either in the face or whatever. So we learned that every time the copper wasn't looking, we would change the stick to the other side of the cheek and sit on that. Because after 5 minutes, the stick started to bore into your flesh. And sometimes you would have one hand stretched out. There were so many hands they couldn't tell. Sometimes there were two or one hand, and you would hold on to your stick, and you would sit above the stick about an inch, so it wouldn't bore into your flesh. And it went on for a whole day. And they didn't find them, so they let us go back after they gave us the evening coffee. I don't think they gave us food that day at all, except coffee in the evening. And they let us back in the barrack. And that was the two main punishments. One time we had a punishment of flogging because somebody was stealing something from somewhere, either from the factory. They brought in one of those horses, and there was a long whip, and one of the coppers had to, also again, there was a ritual. Commander came, finest uniform, and 25 lashes for stealing, and we had to watch.
Okay, in one of those ceremonial punishment situations, about how many Nazis were there and how many couples who controlled the group?
I would say a dozen capos. We only were about 600 at that time. That was tops. Because people disappeared in the middle of the night. Or they died. I would say about a dozen capos. Maybe 3 or 4 SS men, commander, somebody beneath him in charge, and then maybe 1 or 2 from the watchtower. That's about it.
Who were the guards?
They were all SS men for a while. They were placed in 1944 with military people who served in World War I. And we were lucky to get one in the office who was a very small figure. He was a military man from World War I. He was assigned to the office. He had one eye injury from the World War I, and he was a farmer. And since I was working in that office, he never talked to me. He was afraid to. He was the only one that ever spoke in a kind word. He would, am I moving my hands? Sorry.
That's okay.
What was I?
veteran of the First World War.
Oh, yeah. He would get packages from home. And one time he gave me a small piece of cake without a word. He would stand looking outside and nobody was around, not the commander or anybody, period, except me and maybe no, just me alone. And he would stand by the window, he would look out, he would sort of look back to me, and he would tell me what he heard on the radio, that the Russians were moving up, for example, on the front, that the Germans were losing. And he would give me some information.
How old was
God, he was old. I don't know his age, but he was a World War I veteran. So,
he? His name?
no, sorry. I wish I knew. There was another one who, tall, he was the leader of he was the commander, also a World War I veteran, of the people who took the people in the factory. He was the commander of that. And he had some kind words to say to us once in a while.
But what would they be when they were commanders? What kinds of things?
Get in line, give commands, and, straighten out, get in line. Wouldn't yell. Like SS always yelled. Didn't matter what. Capos yelled. Especially if SS was around. There were some good capos and there were some bad ones. There were some Jewish capos, behaved very well. There were some bad ones. They yelled when there were SS around. But most of the time
At the whole picture, where you were there for several months, were the couples the same the whole time?
yes, except towards to the end of 1944. At that time, it came from the SS itself that capos, who were mostly criminals, had a choice to commute the sentences if they join up in the army. And what they did, they were given the choice to join up. The sentence was commuted, but they had to join and go to the front, to the Russian front. And there was one capo who joined up. There were several of them who did. And there was one capo, and he was saying, "You won't see me at the front." And he joined up. I never saw him again. I don't know if he did or not. But some of them got out.
Should we stop now for a few minutes?
Please.
Okay. So now, Victor, where did you go?
When the Russians started moving up their offensive, they emptied out all the concentration camps, Auschwitz, Monowitz, and all those little camps that surrounded Monowitz. And some of them marched, some of them they put on trains, and they put us on a cattle train. And that one World War I guy who was in charge of the commander, he disappeared. But Carpus and the rest of us and the commander, we all went on a cattle train. About 90 to 100, maybe more, in one of those cattle cars. It took us to Mauthausen, over Vienna. We made several stops, and we stopped in Vienna. See, we were the low priority because all the high priority was military. And every time we stopped, we saw a military train going the other direction. They all were going east to the Russian front. So every time there was a military train going to the east, they put us on the side track. We stood there maybe for hours. Then we went on. And the longest stop was in Vienna.
When was this?
This was in January 1945. So we stopped in Vienna, and not very far where I used to live. And there was it was in wintertime, it was cold. We were about 90 people in one of those cattle cars. We had a bucket just for sanitation, nothing else. We had no food. We stopped in Vienna, and there was, at that time they had those engines where they used water, the steam engines, and they had towers where they filled those steam engines with water. And just our cattle car stopped in front of it, and there was a guy just on top of it. He was doing something, and we begged him for water, and he refused. We were holding, there was a little opening in the cattle, in that car. And there was a little opening on top, just enough to get the slats in between, just enough to get your bowl through it. And we asked for water, and he refused. But there was a ledge below it, so we scooped up the snow that was accumulated there, and we ate that, which was a mistake because the snow tasted salty. So we got more thirsty. Then we stopped in Dresden. And one day, I have no idea how long it took us, but it took us a long time, several days, because you always had those stops. One time we stopped, the military train went by, we pulled out, another prison train behind us, and there were either English or American bombers coming over, and they bombed the train. In Dresden, the prison gave us some food, they delivered some food, some bread, and then the train went on to Mauthausen. When we got to Mauthausen, the emptied out all the train. They pushed out we had to push out anybody who was dead. Had to push out, and we marched into Mauthausen camp itself. We stayed there about a day. And then the next day, because it was dark, and the next day they marched us to a satellite of Mauthausen. It's called Gusen. They had 3 camps of Gusen. I don't know which one we went into either, 1, 2, or 3. We walked next to the quarry where we saw people going up the steps, which was about 186 steps to the top. And we saw the people going up with some rock, carrying some rocks. And what the SS, they were sitting on top of it. What they were doing is they were pushing the people down with the rocks. And they were yelling down, there's another parachute coming. They were amusing themselves. We watched by, we saw that prisoners going up. They marched us into Gusen. In Gusen, we had to strip completely. We took a hot shower. This was the first hot shower since Auschwitz. Again, we didn't have any towels, no soap. It was the middle of the winter. It was snow out on the ground outside. They drove us out after the shower, that hot shower. We stood outside for hours, I don't know how long. And in a single file, we marched into the barrack. And at the end of the barrack, there was a table. And again, 3 Nazis, 3 SS men. And the guy with a huge lamp in front of him. And they were looking for lice on your body. And if you were okay, they waved you on. If not, they waved you to the other side. The next morning, that guy was seen hanging from the rafter. And that went on for 5 days. Then again, they had a train. They marched us to that train. They packed us up again about 100 in one of those cattle trains. And they took us to Hanover. In Hanover, we stood for hours on the railroad there. There was another military train apparently. We heard the bombers coming over. It was night. We saw some flashing to the sleds of that car. And then in the morning they marched us out. And the minute you walked out, the bombers came over and they just demolished that station there for a few hours before. They marched us to a camp about 6 miles from the railroad. No, excuse me, 6 kilometers. And this marches to the camp, and the next day they marches in the factory. Again, it was the Hanomag. Hanomag used to manufacture cars before the war. But apparently during the war, or when we got there, they manufactured, again, anti-aircraft guns. And I was put on one of those drill presses. I had no knowledge of a drill press. I never worked in metal. I was doing nothing. I was just standing there with a rag in my hand and was cleaning because the drill, the diamond drills, they didn't have any diamond drills. It was broken. The thing wasn't working, so I was just standing there. Hungry, of course, because food was very scarce. Again, just one bowl and a piece of bread. We marched in the morning. We marched back each day, 6 kilometers. And that went on for about 3 weeks. And one day, same commander, he stuck with us, must have been his job security. That's, I think, was the reason he took us. Came out, he ordered us to dig a big pit, huge, almost as big as this room. And they emptied the sick bay, they lined them up, they shot him, they threw him in, and we marched out towards Bergen-Belsen. There were about, less than 600, maybe 400. We marched, what it's called, what we called the Death March. Anybody who couldn't march fell behind, got shot. We had to push a farmer's wagon, where they used to haul hay in it, with provision for the SS, all kinds of bread, all kinds of stuff. And we had to push it to Bergen-Belsen. And some guys tried to steal some bread. Some SS-men saw him. He took him by his neck, took him a few feet away, and he shot him in the neck. On the way, the people came out of the houses, all women, with pitchers of water in their hands, and tried to give us a drink of water. SS came along and slapped them out of their hands. They wouldn't let us have any water or food. We stopped overnight in one of the farmhouses. It was pitch dark. One SS-man tried to, they all carried their own luggage, tried to carry his luggage. And I did for a while, but it got too heavy, so I just dumped it. It was dark. He didn't know where I was. He tried to find me. I took off my glasses. I still had my glasses. I took it off. I never could find it because everybody looked alike by that time. We were in a barn. There was a noise. People were fighting for space. One time the SS opened the door and blindly took pot shots. You could hear the people screaming who were hit. In the morning, we stepped up with the dead ones when we got out. Blood all over. During the midday, finally we got to Bergen-Belsen. When we got there, there were just thousands of people milling around. It was unbelievable. People half naked, women on one side, sanitation, unbelievable. There was water coming out of some pipe. You drank it. You had no idea it was contaminated. We drank it too. We slept one night in the berg. It was about that time, April. We slept, there was no light in it. You were fighting for space on a wooden floor. No beds, no blankets, nothing. The only thing was a jacket, if you still had a jacket. I lost I had one shoe. I didn't have those pieces of handkerchiefs anymore. I had a jacket, my pair of pants. I didn't have my shirt anymore. I was calling with lice. So the next morning, we went outside. We were looking for food. Somebody did bring us some food, some bread. Never saw any soup. We found a space next to a latrine. One night we slept in it, in the latrine, because it was cold outside. The next night we slept outside. We found a ditch. It's a small, maybe a 2-foot ditch. One side had the fence, barbed fence. And my friend, at that time we were 3. The fourth friend got shot in Hanover, in that pit. Those 2 friends in Lauerhütte, the priest and the communist leader, disappeared one night. They were taken away, no idea. So we were 3 of us. One became ill. He became what they call a Muslim. Muslim was somebody who his mind was going. He lost weight. Weighed maybe 80 pounds or something. Very incoherent. And one morning we woke up. He was dead. So there were 2 of us.
You could stop for this.
No, I go on. So Joe and I was left. We slept outside. It was pretty nice. We slept outside. All we did was scrounge for food and pick up lice our body. I threw away my jacket, so I was half naked. And then one morning we saw some cross, not very far from us, maybe 50 feet, a barrack where a ambulance, a Red Cross ambulance stopped by, and they picked up people. And we saw stretchers going into these ambulances, and so I said to Joe, I'm going to go over there. We both couldn't walk anymore. We were so weak. So I called to the barrack, and some guy came along, a Red Cross attendant. He put a cross on my forehead. He put after a while, he put me on a stretcher. They loaded me up in the truck. They took me somewhere, which was a makeshift hospital, and they cleaned me up completely. They washed me. They powdered, gave some powder, put on, and I passed out. 2 weeks later, I woke up in a bed, white was a window, blue skies. I was alone. There was some food next to me. I tried to eat it. I did, but it came back. I couldn't eat it. There were some cigarettes, and once in a while somebody came in and looked me over. They took me once to an X-ray machine. How they kept me alive, I have no idea. So I stayed there for months. And then one day, again, a Red Cross came, attendant, and they asked me some questions. And they took me back on a stretcher. They put me on a stretcher, on a truck. They took me back to Holland. On the way, we stopped in a farm. Anybody who could walk, they had tables set up with all kinds of beautiful food. They bought me some food. I couldn't eat it. I was unable to eat it. It was the only thing I could keep down was some milk. And they took me back to Holland. They took me into a hospital, a Catholic hospital in Nijmegen. And I started to recuperate. I still couldn't eat very much. Anything I bought up again. The only thing that kept me down was anything that was prepared with milk, like rice or cereal. I developed a thrombosis on both of my legs, which is the clotting of the artery in your leg. They told me it's very dangerous because if the clot goes back into your heart, you die. So they gave me, at that time they didn't know very much about it, so they gave me aspirin to kill the pain. Not knowing that aspirin stops the clotting. So I had to lie in bed with my feet up, so it wouldn't, no movement on my back for 6 weeks. 3 weeks on this leg, 3 weeks on the other leg. And then one day, somebody came in and said, I think you're well enough to go. And in the meantime, the woman I was working in Holland, who just came back from Ravensburg, was looking for her children who were in hiding during all the time in Holland, came by. She heard that I was in the hospital. She came to visit me, and she invited me to stay there. And I said, fine. I had no clothes, I had nothing, so they gave me some clothes in the hospital, just what I had on the back. And I, for some reason, I don't know how, I took a train back to Arnhem. She gave me the address. I went back to her house. She had a house, rented a house, but she wasn't there. She was looking for kids. A neighbor came along, and I told her the story, and she said, well, she let me in, and she said, well, I'll give you some food. And she bought me some food for about 3 days. I stayed in the house, and then Clara was the name of the friend of mine, came back. She didn't find the children yet. And I stayed there for about 2 years. I got a job in a bank, and then one day my brother sent me an affidavit to come to the United States, and that's when I went.
Let me go back to the terrible time that you were at Bergen-Belsen and you saw the Red Cross. Was it German Red Cross, British Red Cross, American Red Cross?
I think it was British. British Red Cross. Because the British were the ones that came in. See, the soldiers came in, and I believe it was the 15th of April.
Do you have any specific memory of that, of the soldiers coming?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There was a main street. The camp was separated. One was the women, the other side was the men. The men were on this side, the women the other. We were separated. There was a main street. And the camp was surrounded, the watchtower was surrounded with Hungarian soldiers. And they came one day. And they, what it came from, I had no idea. Nobody knew. Because there were military men, like, again, World War II, apparently, soldiers who manned the towers. And one day they were relieved with Hungarian soldiers who wore yellow uniform for some reason. And one morning they were gone. And then we saw, we heard noise. You could hear the noise all around New Bergen-Belsen, the shooting, the cannons going off, and you saw the, in the light, in the night, the flashes. So we knew something was happening. And so we saw the soldiers in trucks coming in. And they got off the trucks, they spread out. And a short time later, they were dealing out K rations, which was a mistake. Because there were two cans. One was had cigarettes, candy, cookies in it, and something else. And the other one was lard. Now, if you eat lard, you haven't eaten in those many, many months or years, the stomach is used to it, so you get dysentery. I became ill, naturally. That's why I couldn't walk anymore. I had dysentery. I was diagnosed with typhoid. So that when they found this, then I couldn't walk anymore. Then that's when they found this in the ditch.
What were your thoughts just at the end about the Germans and what you were going through the liberation?
You were absolutely numb. Absolutely. The only hope always, we talked about it, the group, that, the close-knit group, what will you do when you come out? If you come out. We talked about it. But at that time, you were so numb, you had no idea what was going on. All you knew, this was not the enemy. And you saw your friend die. It was just one day before we were liberated, actually. And he said to himself, maybe we make it. But that's it. There was no thought process. There was no talking about it. Nothing.
What did you learn about
Later on, when 1958, by that time I was married in the United States. I was here in Portland. My wife and I went back. She was also born in Vienna, but she came here through France in '39. They were able to escape. We went back to Vienna, and I went back to the Jewish Community Center and because they had the lists apparently who knew what happened to most of the people. And they were telling me that both my parents were in Minsk, but that's all they knew about. And that's all I found out.
Your brother sent you the affidavit to come to the United States?
Yeah.
Then what happened?
I had some money because I was working, so I bought a ticket, and he sent me some money. And I had I had several uncles. I had actually two, uncle and aunt in New York. And I went to New York first. And then stayed there for several months, I think. And then I came to Portland to live with my brother, who got in the meantime got married. I didn't know that he was in the military during the war. He was in Guam. He got married. When I was in the hospital, I got a letter through the Red Cross from a woman, identified herself as Shirley Bergman, and she explained that she married my brother, and that's the first time I knew him. And he was stationed in Portland. He was sent over to Guam and came back to Portland, and that's the reason I came.
When did you leave your brother?
In 1954, I met her here in Portland, in what they call a friendship club. At that time, former refugees had a club. It's called Friendship Club, and all the people once a year they had they met every month, and once a year they had a performance of the members. And one day she came. She was a Reed graduate, and her parents had a shop. And then that's how we met in one of the performances.
Have you continued to live here then?
Yeah, I lived ever since.
What about your work?
By the way, I have two daughters. One is mentally handicapped. She's at home. The other one is younger and works. Since I had art training, I got a job in a display company when I came to Portland, designing and manufacturing display for windows and exhibits. And then we started getting into building scale models. And I acquired a skill in that. And then in '58, I quit the job because we wanted to go to Europe. I went to Vienna, and all over Europe, Holland, England. And when I came back, I applied for a job for the Oregon State Highway Division, who were building models for highways and bridges. And I applied the job, and I got it. And later on I became manager of the model shop. And I stayed there for about 26 years. I built models for the Oregon State Highway Division, and after that I retired.
Are you involved at all in the Jewish community?
None.
I want to ask you about the soldiers that you saw at Bergen-Belsen. Do you remember if they were American soldiers?
No, they were English.
English?
They were English soldiers. And one thing I do remember about them is when they came in, they gave us K rations, and they had cigarettes. And the first thing we tried to do was smoke a cigarette. Because we did smoke cigarettes in camp. And that's a story in itself. We had cigarettes, but we didn't have any matches. So we went up to the soldiers they were across on the fence to light the cigarettes, and they wouldn't let us light our matches. But somehow somebody got a light, and it was passed on one cigarette to another.
Do you know where that initial hospital was that you were taken to by the Red Cross?
It was near Bergen-Belsen. I think it was Celle, C-E-L-L-E. It was a former military complex, and they had a hospital, and it was empty. And because when you looked outside the window, you could see all concrete buildings all around it. So it was a military establishment.
How old were you when you were liberated, or when the camp was liberated?
24.
And when you were on these death marches, did the SS seem disorganized at all, or did it still seem very efficient?
Very efficient, drawn rifles at the ready.
There was no look of panic or improvisation on their
No,
faces?
they tried to keep us in line, and anytime somebody fell over because he couldn't, they just dragged him to the side of the road.
And I want to ask about the camps, the satellite camps that you were in. How far were they from Auschwitz itself in physical kilometers?
I don't know how far in kilometers. I couldn't tell you that. Maybe an hour's away, 1 hour maybe, something. But I couldn't tell you. Conception of distance is, I don't know.
And were there did you notice any attempt of people to observe Jewish holidays in the camp?
No, none. There was no praying going on. Never saw anybody pray. And we did have some Hungarian Orthodox young Jewish people. I never saw him pray. I never saw the priest pray.
And you mentioned there was never any discussion of religion.
That's
Why
right.
was that?
Never touched it.
Why?
We didn't believe in it anymore. Just put it completely out of mind.
When you first came to Auschwitz, you said there was a man pointing. Do you know who that man was? Do you know his name?
You mean the man who decided which way? No idea. It only took a fraction of a second. That's all. And all you could see was those eyes of the SS man and those two guys next to him, standing next to him, and the pointing of a finger, either left or right. Fraction of a second.
And when did you realize what those showers were the gas chambers? When did you realize?
I didn't know that those were gas chambers. When we saw that door opening, they told us later on, like I said, they educated us later on. I never saw the ovens. I never did.
Did you see the smoke?
You could smell it. You could smell that stink of the human flesh. You didn't know at first, but it was human. But then later on, like I said, you were educated.
Did that continue to sense that smell?
Yes, as long as you went Auschwitz. Not in Monowitz. No, not Monowitz. Monowitz we didn't. There was a different smell in Monowitz. Like I said, Monowitz was the Buna where I was. was a Bruno factory, where the irony of the whole thing is that to all those years where they experiment on synthetic rubber, not 1 ounce of synthetic rubber was produced in that. But there were harsh conditions where the prisoners were working.
And with your first train trip to Auschwitz, can you describe it more in detail? For people, did people die on the way into that trip?
No, they didn't, because we were only about 50 people. It gave you room. You could sit down on the floor. You had your things with you, you know. You could sit on your bag or something like that. The only toilet facility was the bucket there. People were talking. People were eating. Fairly mild compared to what happened later.
And let's get some dates here. What year were you born?
1923.
And how old were you when you were first arrested?
I was 15 when I left Vienna. 17 when 1940 started. I was 17, I was 19. 1942 when I was arrested.
And what about your grandparents? Did you ever know them?
I never knew them. They were born and lived in Poland, or Galicia, what they call Galicia. I never knew them, no idea. One died before I even was born.
Do you remember the synagogue? Do you remember what street it was on?
Yeah, it was the Tempelgasse in the 2nd district in Vienna. That's where I was a choir boy.
And was it destroyed during?
Yes, it was during the Kristallnacht. It was completely destroyed.
Would I be able to see your tattoo?
Sure.
You mentioned a story about smoking cigarettes.
Yeah. It was in the middle of summer in 1944. They got the commando got a request from higher ups to pay us for our work. So they gave us some monopoly money. They rewarded us for some kind with monopoly money. Actually, monopoly money, you know. 10 and 5, 10, 15, 20, and once. But you couldn't buy anything with it. So they arranged to bring in some food and cigarettes. Well, the food consisted of mussels in a mustard sauce, which was fish, and Russian tobacco, is Mallorca, they call it, and some pieces of paper so you could roll your own. It tasted terrible. It's some kind of a bark, a leaf, but it was cigarettes, something to smoke. And that's all you were interested in, the cigarettes. You weren't interested in those mussels in that sauce, a yellow sauce. You don't know if it will kill you, or you had no idea. So all we were interested in the cigarettes. So nobody was buying. It cost so much to buy cigarettes, but nobody was buying the mussels. So the Schreiber, who was in charge of all that, devised a scheme. In order to buy cigarettes, you had to buy the food for so much. And a comb. Now remember, we didn't have any hair. So we couldn't comb any. We didn't comb it ourselves. But we had to buy the comb, the mussels, and then the cigarettes. So we didn't eat the food, but we kept the comb. So next morning, when the inspection came, they confiscated the comb because they said, you don't need a comb, you don't have any hair. They put it back into the provisions and sell us the comb next day for the next round.
How do you understand your survival? You're coming through this very
Luck, the will to live. In that order.
Can you say, do you understand where the will to live comes
No, I don't. I don't know. Just had the will to go on.
from? What must all of us know from this?
Quite a bit. Fight against discrimination. Any group. Doesn't matter what the name. Doesn't matter if you like him or don't like him. You cannot separate them. You cannot take away their civil right, their human right. You have to respect them for that. You might not like him. So long as they don't do you any mentally or physical harm.